In this episode, we're going to focus on a concept that is easy to misunderstand when you are new, but incredibly powerful once it clicks. Key risk indicators, KRIs, for AI. A lot of people wait for harm before they react, because harm is obvious and urgent, but a strong AI risk program tries to catch the warning signals before harm becomes severe. KRIs are those warning signals, and they matter even more for AI because AI systems can fail quietly, drift slowly, and scale mistakes quickly. If you only look for incidents, you are often learning too late, and you are learning under pressure, which leads to messy decisions and poor communication. KRIs are a way of turning AI risk into something you can observe, trend, and escalate in a calm, structured way. They are not about predicting the future perfectly. They are about noticing when risk is rising so you can intervene early. By the end, you should be able to explain what an AI risk KRI is, how it differs from normal performance metrics, how to choose useful signals, and how KRIs connect to monitoring, tolerance, and escalation triggers. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. The first step is to define what a KRI actually is in plain language, because people often confuse it with any metric that has a number. A KRI is a metric or signal that provides early warning that risk is increasing or that controls are weakening, and the key word is warning. It is meant to move before harm moves, or at least early enough that you can still prevent severe harm. A performance metric might tell you how accurate a model is, but a KRI tells you that conditions are changing in a way that could lead to unacceptable outcomes. A KRI might be a shift in error patterns, an increase in unusual inputs, an increase in overrides by humans, or an increase in complaints linked to AI decisions. KRIs are also tied to action, meaning they should have thresholds and escalation paths, not just dashboards. If a KRI crosses a boundary, the organization should know what to do next and who is responsible for doing it. For beginners, it helps to think of KRIs like the check engine light in a car, which does not tell you exactly what is broken, but tells you should stop ignoring the system and investigate. In AI risk, those early signals protect trust and safety by prompting intervention before damage is widespread. To choose useful KRIs, you need to be clear about what risk you are trying to detect early, because not all signals matter in every context. A KRI should connect back to the harms the organization cares about, such as money, safety, trust, and legal exposure, and it should connect to the failure patterns AI tends to have, such as error, bias, drift, and misuse. For example, if drift is a major concern because the environment changes often, you need KRIs that reveal shifts in input patterns and output behavior over time. If fairness and discrimination concerns are a major concern because decisions affect individuals, you need KRIs that reveal disparities and unusual differences in outcomes. If misuse is a concern because employees have easy access to AI tools, you need KRIs that reveal unapproved use, sensitive data exposure, or violations of policy boundaries. If financial harm is a concern because AI influences fraud detection or transaction decisions, you need KRIs tied to unusual patterns in losses or false positives that create customer friction. The point is that KRIs should not be chosen because they are easy to measure. They should be chosen because they warn you about the most important risks. Good KRIs are purposeful, not random. One important beginner idea is that KRIs should often focus on changes and trends, not only on absolute values. A single number can be misleading if you do not know what normal looks like for your system, your population, and your environment. If a model's error rate has always been slightly higher in one category, that might be known and controlled, but if the error rate suddenly spikes, that is a warning. If the number of human overrides is stable, that might indicate controls are functioning. But if overrides increase sharply, it might indicate the system is producing more questionable outputs or that users have lost trust. If customer complaints about automated decisions rise over time, that might signal harm even before you have a confirmed incident. Trends help you detect drift and changing behavior, which is central to AI risk. They also support a calm escalation process because you can show that risk is moving in a concerning direction rather than sounding like you are reacting emotionally. For beginners, this is why monitoring is not just about snapshots. It is about watching motion over time. KRIs are the measurements of that motion. Now let's look at a few types of KRIs that are commonly useful in AI risk programs, while keeping the discussion plain and not tool-specific. One type is input quality and input anomaly signals, which warn when the data going into the AI is changing in ways that could break reliability. This could include increases in missing fields, increases in unusual values, changes in the distribution of input categories, or increases in inputs that are out of the model's expected range. Another type is output stability signals, which warn when the model's outputs are shifting in ways that might indicate drift, such as changes in average scores, changes in the distribution of classifications, or changes in the frequency of certain outputs. A third type is human reliance and override signals, which warn when users are increasingly disagreeing with the model or when they are relying on it too heavily without review. A fourth type is harm proxy signals, which warn when the downstream outcomes that matter are shifting, such as increases in complaints, increases in appeals, increases in rework, or increases in incident reports. Each of these categories can be made specific to the use case, which is the key to making KRIs meaningful. Beginners should see these as families of signals that you tailor based on impact and risk boundaries. Fairness-related KRIs deserve special attention because fairness harm is often subtle and can be missed if you only monitor overall performance. A fairness KRI might track whether error rates differ meaningfully between groups or whether decision outcomes shift in a way that disproportionately affects a population. It might also track whether certain categories of cases are being denied or flagged at much higher rates than expected compared to historical baselines. The goal is not to force every organization into a single definition of fairness, but to ensure that potential unfairness is detectable early enough to intervene. For high-impact decisions, fairness KRIs should be treated as serious because disparities can create trust harm and legal exposure quickly. A beginner misunderstanding is thinking fairness is only evaluated once before deployment, when in reality fairness can drift over time as the population changes or as data inputs change. That means fairness needs monitoring, and monitoring needs indicators that are visible and actionable. When fairness KRIs cross thresholds, the response might involve deeper review, temporary restrictions, or adjustment of how the AI is used, especially if decisions affect rights. The most important part is that fairness KRIs are tied to oversight, not treated as academic observations. Misuse and policy compliance KRIs are also critical, especially in environments where employees have many AI tools available. A compliance KRI might track the number of unapproved AI tools detected in use, or the volume of requests to use restricted tools, or the number of policy exception requests being filed. It might also track data handling behavior, such as increases in attempts to input sensitive data into unapproved tools, though the specific signals depend on what is observable. Another misuse signal is the appearance of AI outputs in external communications without appropriate review, which can show up as increased corrections, increased complaints, or unusual patterns in customer responses. The purpose of these indicators is not to police employees harshly, but to detect where pressure and convenience are driving risky behavior so the organization can provide safer alternatives and clearer training. Misuse often increases during times of high workload, so monitoring should help leadership notice when controls are being strained. A beginner-friendly way to see this is to think of misuse KRIs as signals of process stress, where people are taking shortcuts because the approved path is too slow or unclear. If you ignore those signals, shadow AI use grows, and risk becomes hard to control. Another useful family of KRIs involves control health, meaning whether the governance and oversight practices that are supposed to exist are actually happening. For example, a KRI might track how many high-impact AI systems have up-to-date documentation, or how many have completed required reviews on schedule, or how many have monitoring reports delivered on time. If those numbers decline, it is a warning that controls are weakening, which increases risk even if no harm has been observed yet. Control health indicators are especially helpful for executives because they show whether the program is operating consistently, and they can signal resource strain or process failures before incidents occur. Beginners often focus only on model performance, but in real risk programs, governance failures are a major cause of harm because they allow risky systems to operate without oversight. If monitoring cadence slips, if approvals are not recorded, or if exception decisions pile up without review, the organization is becoming more exposed. Control Health KRIs turn those governance weaknesses into visible risk signals. This is why Domain 2 emphasizes operational discipline, not just conceptual understanding. KRIs are not useful unless they are tied to thresholds and responses, because the value of a warning signal is the action it triggers. This is where risk tolerance thinking connects directly to monitoring. If leadership has defined that certain harms are unacceptable, then KRI thresholds should reflect that, with stricter thresholds for high-impact systems and looser thresholds for low-impact systems. A KRI threshold is essentially a line that, when crossed, forces a conversation or a control change, such as increased human review, deeper investigation, or temporary restriction of AI use. The threshold should not be so tight that it triggers constant false alarms, because then people ignore it, but it should not be so loose that it triggers only after harm is widespread. Setting thresholds is partly about learning what normal looks like, and that learning improves over time as the organization gains monitoring experience. The important beginner insight is that thresholds must be connected to decision rights, meaning someone must have authority to act when thresholds are crossed. If you have a KRI that signals rising risk, but no one can intervene, you do not have a control system, you have a dashboard. It is also important to avoid KRI overload, because too many indicators can reduce clarity rather than improve it. Beginners sometimes assume that more measurement means more control, but measurement without focus creates noise and fatigue. A good approach is to choose a small set of KRIs that cover the most important risk pathways for each high-impact use case, and then use those KRIs consistently over time. You can also maintain a broader set of supporting metrics for analysis, but KRIs should remain the handful of indicators that leaders and owners watch for early warning and escalation. Another way to keep focus is to align KRIs with specific harms and specific controls, so each KRI has a purpose and a corresponding response. If a KRI does not change decisions, it is not really a KRI, it is just a statistic. This focus also supports better executive reporting, because executives do not want a wall of metrics. They want a few meaningful signals that tell them whether risk is within tolerance. For beginners, the lesson is to value clarity over quantity, because clarity leads to action. To tie this into a scenario, imagine an organization using AI to help prioritize cases for a compliance review team. The harm if AI fails could include missed high-risk cases and increased legal exposure, so KRIs should warn when risk is rising. Input anomaly KRIs might show that the types of cases entering the system have changed, suggesting drift. Output stability KRIs might show that fewer cases are being flagged as high risk than historically expected, suggesting the model is becoming less sensitive. Human override KRIs might show reviewers frequently disagreeing with AI recommendations, suggesting reliability concerns. Harm proxy KRIs might show increased rework or increased late discoveries of high-risk cases, suggesting the AI is missing important signals. Control health KRIs might show that monitoring reviews are being missed or that documentation updates are behind schedule, suggesting governance weakness. Each KRI would have thresholds tied to escalation and response, such as requiring a review of the model's behavior, tightening human review requirements, or temporarily limiting the AI's role. This example shows how KRIs help detect increasing risk before a major incident forces a rushed response. As we close, defining AI risk KRIs is about building an early warning system that helps the organization act before harm becomes severe, especially because AI can fail quietly and scale quickly. A KRI is not just a metric. It is a signal tied to action, designed to warn when risk is rising or controls are weakening. Useful KRIs connect to the harms the organization cares about and to the AI failure patterns that create those harms, including error, bias, drift, and misuse. Good KRIs often focus on trends, input and output shifts, human reliance patterns, harm proxies, and control health, with stricter thresholds for high-impact systems. KRIs become real when they are tied to tolerance boundaries, escalation triggers, and named owners with authority to intervene. When an organization uses KRIs well, it becomes proactive rather than reactive, and it builds confidence that AI is being managed responsibly even as conditions change. This monitoring discipline sets up the next step in your learning, where we reinforce risk language and governance decisions through rapid recall, because the more fluent you are, the easier it becomes to design and communicate these controls consistently.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit BareMetalCyber.com.